both Chrystia Freeland and Trudeau are integrally associated with the World Economic Forum. And there's a globalist agenda. This sounds like right-wing propaganda, I suppose, but there is a globalist elite agenda that is aimed at severely modifying the manner in which our fundamental institutions operate under the, what would you call, the impetus of yet another crisis, which is the hypothetical climate crisis. And I'm an admirer of Bjorn Lomborg. I think he's done the best work on this matter, all things considered, methodologically. He's got the best methodology for determining how to analyze what steps should be taken to deal with environmental concerns. I'm not going to call them emergencies. He's documented it very carefully, and I defy anyone on the climate catastrophe side to show evidence of a methodology more sophisticated than Bjorn Lomborg's in terms of analyzing an actual pathway forward that isn't merely apocalyptic neuroticism and the desire for totalitarian control. And so that's all lurking in the background. And so, and that's also pulling the country apart in all sorts of ways, and it's underneath events like the fact that this attack occurred in northern BC the other day on the project
Coastal Gas Link.
The Coastal Gas Link, exactly. That's part of the attempt to ensure that we all have cheap, reliable energy as we move forward into the future. And so, I'm going to make it one more case about this. I worked on the UN Secretary General's report on sustainable development for 2 years and analyzed all this sort of material data. And that's where I came across Lomborg, trying to sort this stuff out. And one of the things I learned from doing that was really heartening to me and also kind of catastrophically emotion-provoking was that if you look deeply into the data from as many different perspectives as you could manage, let's say with an open heart, the conclusion that you would derive is that the faster we can get cheap energy to the world's poor people, and the cheaper that energy is, and that's mostly going to be fossil fuels, especially natural gas, if we can do it right, the faster we're going to move towards clean energy in general, the richer people are going to get, and the more sustainable environmental movement we can have in the future. We make the poorest people rich by giving them access to cheap energy, mostly facilitated by fossil fuel. That's the best possible move forward for the planet and for those who are absolutely poor. And again, I defy anyone on the environmental catastrophe side to formulate an argument showing how that's not true. You say, I'm on the side of the oppressed, I'm on the side of the poor. It's like, you're not. If you're not for cheap energy, you're not on that side at all. And so, this bloody moralistic posturing is enough to drive you to distraction.
Well, the analysis of the energy movement, I mean, it is so patrician and so patronizing, and so, by the way, it has 100% support from every possible major media, but it is a craze. And by the way, we just put in over $500 billion of a deficit, over $1 trillion of a debt. Oil is now ramping up to $80 or $100 a barrel, and the Canadian government has seized Alberta, built a concrete wall around it, and the greatest natural resource we have is frozen. Here's one for you. Maybe the emergencies that we're seeing this week, I don't know. Maybe this is one way of forestalling the knowledge that they have gutted. At the time of inflation, after 2 years of economic disaster, the one source of wealth that we have, they've closed it down.
There's definitely a moral hazard there, Rex, is that, there's nothing more psychologically attractive than a false crisis to divert attention from a real crisis. And, I've been talking with people who are in the economic know in a very profound manner and who've demonstrated that in a variety of different ways. And one of the facts that was pointed out to me rather forcefully over the last month was that over the last 15 years, Canada's gross domestic product per capita has remained relatively constant at $43,000, while the Americans has moved from approximately that to $65,000. And so that's just one of many indicators that Canada is in a state of economic crisis, the magnitude of which has not yet been entirely revealed, and that the country is tearing itself apart at the seams. And so why not have a false crisis? Because then you can look heroic when you're dealing with something that doesn't exist, and you can beat down the Nazis and the Confederates instead of facing up to the fact that you've been so appallingly incompetent and moralistic over the last 6 years that things are really about to manifest themselves in their true nature.
Well, you could bring this down. We started at a very early point. You can bring this to a good circle. After the 2 years, we haven't got the inventory of how many businesses have failed, how many families have been disjointed or depressed and made anxious, how much the economy itself overall has been hurt. We don't know yet if once the banks start to rise their interest rates, how this debt will drown us. We also have inflation, but here's the biggest thing of all. Here's the biggest thing, and this didn't happen because of a disease. You mentioned at the beginning, I've been at this far too long, but I have not, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm not being rhetorical. I can't remember a time when there are sharper differences, more angry divisions. We've had contests between provinces, and we've had big fights over pipelines and transmission lines and all sorts of, but it was never carried out with animosity. It never, by the way, called up the brands. I went from 50, 60 years, never heard anyone call anyone a Nazi because they didn't like what they said. A man who comes in and basically says to the world, I am the personification of all that is new and correct in a 21st century virtue. Remember, it's 2015. I am sanctified by my own correctness on all of the genuine issues, and I am going to build a tranquility founded in respect for all Canadians. And 6 years later, you got stallions on Parliament Hill running into walkers. You got the police probably being forced to do stuff that they don't want to. The West is angry. And we have on the public scene, and it's
the
a sad thing
opposition
to
is
say,
ineffectual and chaotic.
we have
NDP
no
has abandoned the working class. The press
the
is in
NDP
collusion
has
with
gone
the
away.
government.